Hello, everyone. I am one of the co-chairs of Otessa 22, and the third day has a legendary name just like the other days. Dr. Tony Bates has years of experience on online and distance education, and his ideas will be very enlightening. Dr. Bates, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Buskett. I'm going straight into a video introduction. Well, I hope you forgive the somewhat frivolous introduction, but I'm really wanting to make the point that partly as a result of COVID, there is some disruption going to be coming in teaching and learning and post-secondary education. Now, that was already occurring somewhat before COVID-19, but it was happening in a slow and steady, and some might say a responsible manner. But during COVID, the whole process has been speeded up somewhat. And whether those changes will continue will really depend on the instructors and the teachers in post-secondary education in Canada. What I want to do here is to talk about the pandemic and its impact on online learning, what lessons we learned from the pandemic, what online learning was doing pre-pandemic, what was happening, and really the reasons why teaching must change, and in particular, the importance of focusing on the affordances of different media and different modes of delivery so that we can choose the best options for our students. And that means looking at how to select different media, and I want to talk a little bit about that and then come to some conclusions at the end. In March 2020, as you know, everybody pivoted to emergency remote learning within 2 weeks. That was 100,000 instructors in Canada, and that was an incredible achievement. It resulted in 2 years of post-secondary education being saved for most students. It was done mainly by streaming lectures via Zoom. There were good reasons for that. It was the quickest and simplest thing to do. It was relatively easy to use technology, and there's no time for redesign. And I should have mentioned that at the beginning, I hope you'll use the chat facility to make comments or add questions, which we can deal with at the end. I should have mentioned that. And you might want to comment on whether you agree that the pivot to emergency remote learning was a fundamental change in post-secondary education. However, we learned quite a bit about the limitations of synchronous online learning. There's been quite a lot of research on emergency remote learning. In fact, Professor Buskett has produced one of the earliest articles, a collection of research papers on the impact of emergency remote learning. And some of the key lessons that came was that there was too much passive screen time for most students and too little student interaction and work overload, both for instructors and for students. And that's not surprising because nobody had time to be trained. This is not a criticism of instructors, it's just a fact that that's what happened. What we did find is that considerable adaptation is needed to the standard 1 hour or 90-minute lecture when moving it online. We need shorter presentation, chunks of presentation broken up by interaction, use of breakout rooms for interaction, for instance, And many students wanted access to the recordings of the lecture. That was very important. In other words, they wanted asynchronous access to the synchronous sessions. Now, before online learning came along, before the pandemic came along, there was quite a lot of development in online learning in Canada. Research by the Canadian Digital Learning Research Association between 2017 and 2019 found that 76% of all Canadian post-secondary institutions were already offering fully online courses for credit. This was roughly 10% of all the course enrollments in Canadian universities and colleges were fully online. And the annual growth had been pretty steady over about 10 to 15 years, but a steady growth, a steady increase of about 10% per annum in the number of online enrollments across the system. And 93% used the learning management system, either fully online or obviously with only 76% fully online. Some must have been used it also to support their classroom teaching. And 63% use live online lectures. So there was quite a bit of use of online lecturing before the pandemic came. That's use of video, Zoom and so on. But many instructors had never used it. This is at 63% of the institutions, not necessarily 63% of staff that were using online, synchronous video conferencing. So, now, why do I think that teaching and learning must change? Well, I think there are three separate reasons. They're all coming together. The first is that we live in a digital world. Automation and the demand for high-level skills is requiring a shift in teaching methods. The Royal Bank of Canada produced a report 3 years ago called Humans Wanted, which was looking at the kind of jobs that will exist in 3 or 4 years' time from the time they did the survey. And they found that there'll be plenty of jobs, but they'd be different jobs. And in particular, what was required was fair degree of flexibility in the labor market. In other words, high-level skills like critical thinking, good communication skills, and so on, that employers and students can take from job to job as the jobs change rapidly. And in particular, a need for more focus on skills-based learning rather than content presentation and comprehension. And I think that one of the things that we don't do very well is look at how we progress skills in post-secondary education. How do we take a student that's already got some critical thinking skills from their first year course and improve and build those critical thinking skills during a course so that they continue to improve in those skills as they go through university and college. The Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario did a survey of students going into university and coming out, and it looked at their literacy, numeracy, and critical thinking skills. And while it found that over the 4-year undergraduate degree program, their numeracy and literacy skills improved, their critical thinking skills didn't. There was no difference from beginning to end. And we can argue about the methodology there, but it is concerning that we don't have a very good way of tracking the development of skills in post-secondary education. The second is that we're moving from a 19th century industrial model of a fixed time and fixed place where students come from 9 to 5, they're all in the same class together, they move on to another class together. And we're moving away from that model, not only in education, but in other areas like work, to more anytime, any place learning, hybrid learning, flexible learning, hybrid work, flexible work, and so on. So we need to prepare our students for that changing model that's moving away from the big factory model to more of a digital economic model. And that means really we need to explore and exploit the benefits of digital technology, such as learning management systems, games, and virtual reality. What can these tools do that will improve the students' performance and learning? And particularly, how can we use these technologies to increase their 21st century intellectual skills? Now, before COVID came along, we actually had 30 years of prior experience, research, and best practices teaching online. Unfortunately, none of those best practices or experience was used by most instructors. They weren't aware of it. They had no need to know about it if they were teaching mainly face-to-face. So we need to apply both the lessons from online learning pre-pandemic and the lessons learned during the pandemic to future teaching and learning in higher education. And this brings me to the use of affordances of media. I'm not a particular fan of the term affordances, but it's a lot shorter than writing the strengths and weaknesses of a particular medium. It has an interesting origin. It came from a psychologist called James Gibson, and he argued that certain tools or certain things we use every day have affordances. And the example he gave was, if you come to a door and there's a flat metal plate on it, you push. You don't have to have an instruction push, you automatically push. If it has a handle, you turn the handle. That's the affordances that he was talking about. And here I'm talking about the educational affordances of different media. Now, let me say very clearly that there's no real research into this area. It's mainly experience. Most instructors will say things like, well, in my subject area, students have to come in person because they have to develop hands-on skills. They have to operate a lathe, or they have to do something with their hands. And I need to be there to supervise them in person. They can't do that remotely. And we can say things like, well, text is a very good medium for evidence-based arguments, because you can collect the arguments all together in one place. They don't change. Once you put the argument down, it's permanent. And you can review and analyze that. And text is very good for that kind of analysis of evidence-based arguments. Video, we could argue, is very good for demonstrating processes and so on. And one of the problems of trying to define affordances is that they are likely to vary by subject area. So an affordance of video in history is likely to be different than in biology, for instance. It'll have different affordances in biology. And so we're really much dependent on our experience in doing this, because we don't have a lot of research. And because it's a little bit like quantum physics, it kind of shifts as you look at it. But nevertheless, there is an important idea here that we should be looking for what these tools and technologies do best in our teaching. Now, one of the things that I felt very strongly before COVID-19 was the strength of asynchronous learning for online learners. And in asynchronous online learning, the learning management system is the core tool. It's the core tool for online, and I would also argue it should be the core tool for blended learning as well, because a learning management system can hold all these technologies within it, including streamed lecturing. That can be part of the learning management system. It can be embedded in it. And from a student perspective, the advantage of asynchronous learning is anytime, anywhere. And now, as we have more and more students working part-time, and they may not be officially part-time students, they may have a full-time teaching load, learning load or course load, but nevertheless, many of them are often doing part-time jobs. They need the flexibility that fully asynchronous online learning can bring. And also, one area where there has been a lot of research is in the advantages of being able to start and replay a recording of a video or of a lecture, so you can go back and over it and replay it again. So this is a very important tool for students to improve their learning. We know that multimedia is often better than a single medium. If students see something, they read something, and they do something, then they're more likely to learn than if it's just a lecture or a presentation. The other thing that learning management systems allow is for the management of workload. And that was a big problem during COVID-19 with emergency remote learning. The learning management systems allows you to break the work up into say weekly tasks that students must do. And one thing that I've always done with online learners is to have a kind of estimate of how many hours per week they should be working on my course. If they've taken, say, 5 courses per session, per semester, then I would say, well, that's roughly 8 hours study a week. And everything has to fit within those 8 hours. My assignments, the time they spend accessing videos and so on, whatever activities I give them, if they're online in discussion forums, the whole total of that should not come to more than 8 hours. Otherwise, we're starting to overload the students. And of course, that's a notional 8 hours. Again, students will vary. Some will want more, some will want less. But it's a way of controlling both their work and my work as an instructor as well. And a learning management system allows you to do that. The other thing you can build in online, there are built-in online discussion forums that allow for structured interaction and discussion for students, if that's important in your subject area. And lastly, it affects the way you assess students. So learning management systems allows you to track the performance of the students from week to week because their activities are recorded in the learning management system. You can see what they've done, you can see what they've posted, and you can design it so that, for instance, they create blogs or online articles about what they've read and so on. They can build a portfolio of work that you can track, and that allows for continuous assessment, a more authentic assessment as they go through the course, and also incidentally avoids having masses of marking to do at the end of a course because you've been assessing them throughout the course. So there are a lot of advantages for online learners in using a learning management system over, say, a Zoom lecture, although Zoom lectures could be part of that integrated learning experience. So this raises the question then, what makes in-person teaching special? If we think of in-person teaching as just another medium of delivery to students, what makes it special? Why? So the default position for many instructors is that in-person is inherently superior. The research, it's always been this way, and in-person teaching is always going to be better than online learning. However, as I said, there's 30 years of research that says that isn't so. You can teach well online, you can teach well face-to-face, but you can also teach badly face-to-face and well online. Students will learn better if you teach well online than if you teach badly face-to-face. So it's the conditions that matter. It's masses of research to show no significant difference between students learning online and students learning face-to-face. There's more variance within the in-person teaching than there is in the between the two conditions, for instance. So that leads me to what I call the law of equal substitution. What we should start with is the assumption that everything can be taught as well online as in person, except, and we need to define the exceptions. So this brings me to my major point I want to make in this. We should be asking always, why should students get on the bus to come to my class? What am I offering them on campus in my in-person teaching that they could not get more conveniently and more flexibly online? And there are good answers to those questions, and they will vary from instructor to instructor and from course to course. But I think it's an important question now that all instructors should be asking themselves when they're designing their teaching. Now, I would argue there are 3 factors that influence this. The kind of students you have, the requirements of the subject matter, and very significantly, a number of issues that are not directly teaching issues, but affect student motivation and engagement. So let's start with students. In general, and again, there are always variations here with students, the older, more experienced in terms of learning, in other words, graduate students compared with first-year students, or students with family, they want fully online. They want the flexibility of being able to study fully online. Students with part-time work or family responsibilities, but who still want to come to campus, they would like a hybrid learning where they can do some of their learning online and some in person on campus. And most young students coming fresh from school, and also significantly, as we learned through COVID, students without adequate internet access or equipment at home, they want the in-person experience. And I want to say something about that last point. We've found about anywhere between 5 to 20% of students had problems with internet access or lack of equipment at home, or even more importantly, a quiet place to study at home, particularly if they were in, say, multiple people within the house using equipment and so on. And we need, all of us now need to think very carefully about how we support those students who do not have adequate internet access at home. For some of them, coming to campus was really important because they could get good internet access on campus and they couldn't get it at home. But also a lot of students fresh from school, they want the campus experience. That's what they're going to university or college for, is the campus experience. In terms of subject requirements, this, as I said, varies from subject to subject, but I think we can say some things here. Most theory, content, comprehension, and many of the soft skills of critical thinking, problem solving, etc., can be taught pretty well online. But hands-on and practical work needs to be done in person. And as I said, there's no theory or evidence-based justification for this, but intuitively, I think most of you will feel that this makes some sense. So again, I'm asked that question, what can't be done online? Because for many students, online access is more convenient and enables them to perform better if they've got time to do the work online. So what are the affordances of hands-on, of in-person teaching? I said hands-on skills. Another very important one is deep social learning and trust. Getting to know your instructor or the instructor getting to know their students very well. That increases engagement and motivation for the students. A better knowledge of the students, if you can see them acting spontaneously in front of you and not just a little square on a screen, you get a better knowledge of your students. And real-time interaction and spontaneity. If you want students to argue and think critically on their feet, then obviously having synchronous in-person learning is going to be better than where they can go away and look things up and come back online. But I would add that nearly all these things are possible online, but may be more difficult to do or more expensive or time-consuming to do. We know, for instance, we can teach a large number of hands-on skills through simulations, videos, and virtual reality. You can build social learning and trust online, but you have to design your courses in such a way that you build that trust with students. You can get to know your students very well online, but you have to make special efforts to do that. One obvious way is to ask them to do a blog post of who they are with their permission, put it up and share it with other students and so on. So there are ways of doing all these things online. The question really is it too much effort, or is it better for students to come on campus to try to achieve some of these things? And then the non-teaching factors, which are very important for many young students. And that's the social life on campus, the bars, the sex, meeting other people of the same age and so on. As I said, bonding and building trust. The support facilities, again, having adequate places to study, having access to a library. There's a whole range of support facilities, being able to get access to instructors, and particularly informal counseling through chance meetings, meeting your professor on campus and having a chat and so on. And all these things build student confidence and student a feeling of belonging, which is very hard sometimes to do online. And again, a lot of online design attempts to build these things, but you have to actually build it. It doesn't happen spontaneously as it often does on campus. And the important thing is to understand students who are in a fully online environment. You're all going to have some of these students sooner or later. Fully online students tend to be older and more mature, as I mentioned. Studying is only part of their priorities. They often have jobs, they have family, they have to fit in their studies with other activities. They require flexibility, they fit it in when they can. And a really important part is they're often studying on their own in isolation. And much can be done in the design of online learning to break down that isolation, but we have to start from that point that students are working in isolation. What can we do to make them more engaged and participate in online learning? So students usually need more support and guidance to manage their learning online. This is a teachable skill. You can teach a student how to become an independent learner. And again, this has curriculum implications. For instance, it would make sense to me for first-year courses to be mainly on campus, but gradually introducing some online work with deadlines and so on for them to do, until eventually by third or fourth year, they can take a whole course online. So it is a teachable skill, how to study online and independently. And it's a very important skill because they're going to need this skill when they graduate. This is one of the key skills that the Royal Bank of Canada identified, independent learning skills, because people are going to have to go on learning after they leave university. They need appropriate technology, as I mentioned, and teaching specifically designed for the online learning context. And this brings me into some discussions about HyFlex. There's a lot of talk about HyFlex, of allowing students to study in any way they like. But if that's just no more than allowing them to view a recorded lecture, then that's not taking account of their online learning context. And I think if we are going to have HyFlex, we're probably going to have to start with designing fully online courses, which students could take fully online and would work fully online, but also have alternative versions where some of the study could be done on campus and or a mix of online and blended and so on. So if you have fully online students, it does need redesign. Now, I'm not going to go through all these media in any detail, but I just want to give you a list of some of the media now available to us as instructors. Text, which has been around for a long time, books, newspapers, journals, and so on. Graphics, such as tables, pictures, cartoons. Audio, such as radio programs, podcasts, cassettes. Video, movies, YouTube, documentaries, and talking heads. And I'm going to say a bit more about video in a moment. Computing, such as adaptive learning, animation, simulations, virtual reality. And then social media, such as Twitter and Facebook. And lastly, I see in-person learning, classroom teaching, as just one other medium of delivery for students now. So if we have all these different media, what are their best affordances? Well, I will argue that video is massively underused or badly used in education, and particularly post-secondary education. We need to afford its affordances. In my book, Teaching in a Digital Age, I have a chapter on video. It's an online textbook, so you can just go to each example and click on the link and see the video. And I found something like 50 different affordances of video, depending on the subject area. All this material is freely available now online and available for use by instructors or by students. You don't have to create this material, it's out there already. If you take a topic in your subject area and do a Google search for video plus the name of the topic, you'll find, I'm guaranteed that you will find lots of examples. Some of it may not be appropriate, some of it may be very amateurish and so on, but some of it will be excellent. And when I did the first version of the book back in 2017, I had problems finding examples for some of the 50 affordances that I had because they weren't freely available online. They'd been produced by professional studios and there were copyright issues and so on. When I'm doing the third version, I was easily able to find online free examples for every one of the affordances or topics I was looking for. Now, these obviously got to be linked to educational objectives. And I'm going to just to choose 3 examples here. One is in many subjects, we teach the normal curve of distribution in statistics for a variety of applications. And here is not a brilliant production, but it does the job very effectively.
Understanding normal distribution. The average woman's height in the United States is 5 feet 5 inches tall. If you go out on the street and measure the height of the first 3 women that you find, the odds are very strong that it's not going to average 5 feet 5 inches. It'll average something else. You're going to probably get a wide variation. Like in this case, we have one woman that's close to 6 feet tall. But if you increase your sample size and start measuring the height of more women, the odds are that you'll end up with something that approaches a bell-shaped curve. Once you've sampled enough cases, you don't have to measure the height of every woman in the United States. You can use statistics to make predictions. Once you know your average and your standard deviation and your data fits within a bell-shaped curve, then you know that 68% of your cases will fall within one standard deviation of the mean. 95% of your cases will fall within 2 standard deviations of the mean. 98% of the cases will fall within 3 standard deviations of the mean. A number of statistics assume normality.
Okay, I've got to get out of this now. And how do I get out?
We can share the video links later on.
Okay, there we go. Share screen. Okay, the second one I'm going to show is the anatomy of the brain.
We are still on the
adult human brain weighs approximately 1.5 kilograms, making up less than 2% of a person's body weight. And yet, it defines our humanity and makes us the individuals that we are. The brain is responsible for the generation of language and thought, attention, consciousness, memory, and imagination. In order to fit into the skull and accommodate the massive number of neurons and connections needed, the brain is highly folded. This results in the creation of gyri or ridges and sulci or furrows. If we were to unfold the entire human brain, it would take up approximately 1 square meter. Perhaps the most impressive feature of the brain is the amount of connections formed between neurons. There are an estimated 86 billion neurons in the brain, each of which forms an average of 7,000 connections with other neurons, resulting in between 100 and 500 trillion synapses within the brain. In an attempt to conceive of the enormity of this system, the number of neurons in the human brain has been equated to the number of stars in the Milky Way. Now that we have begun to appreciate the complexity of the human brain, let's begin to examine its structure. The brain can be divided into functional and anatomical regions. We will now start with an anatomical overview to establish a common terminology and to describe the areas of the brain. The brain has multiple surfaces. Here we have the superior surface, and this here is the inferior surface. There are also anterior and posterior aspects to the brain. Here's a section through the brain within the skull, and we can appreciate the axes within the CNS. Connections can travel either towards the anterior pole, here, or towards the inferior end of the spinal cord. Fibers can move either rostrally towards the rostral pole or caudally towards the caudal pole. Now,
Stop share and come back into share screen.
Dr. Tanabates, instead of sharing your browser, if you share the entire screen, the video can be seen.
Yeah.
When you click on the link, it plays in another browser window, so we cannot see it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. The point I'm making here is that getting hold of a human brain is extremely difficult. It's almost impossible for most biology labs to get hold of a human brain for obvious reasons. So this kind of video is very valuable in providing a way of looking at the human brain you couldn't do in any other way. The other point I want to make about video for students, it has a strong affective aspect. It makes students, it engages students, makes them interested, adds that kind of engagement that's quite difficult to do very often with an abstract topic. So I want to talk a little bit about how we choose media, given the fact that we have so many. I've talked about the affordances, but that's only one of many of the things that we need to consider when discussing, when choosing media for teaching. And I've got what I call the sections model, which is each of these is an acronym for students, ease of use, etc. And I want to emphasize that nearly all the research on the use of media in teaching has focused, not surprisingly perhaps, on the fourth area. What are the media characteristics and what instructional strategies are we going to use for using technology, and how does that affect what we decide? But there are many other things that should be taken into account when choosing technology. What kind of students have you got? Do they have access to the technology? It's no good having virtual reality if you've only got one headset, 100 students, for instance. How easy is the technology to use? What's the cost and effort involved and the time involved in using this technology? And again, that's why I make a distinction between pre-recorded and free to use video and stuff that you have to do yourself. Interaction, what level of interaction does it allow for the students with the medium or technology? What are the organizational issues? Do you have to have a full television studio available? Do you have problems getting access to this technology? Is the IT department going to make it difficult for you, etc.? How well do these technologies allow the students to network and learn from other students and so on? And lastly, and very importantly, security and privacy. One of the great advantages of learning management system is it's password protected. The students can be considered relatively safe and secure within that learning management system. When you go out, if you start using social media like Facebook, then it's very much harder to control the situation and control what kinds of influences will happen with students. So again, these are all important issues to be taken into account when deciding on the use of media. So what would an advanced digital learning course design look like? Well, let's take a core skill such as knowledge management. How to find, analyze, evaluate, and apply information in your subject area. This is an increasingly important 21st century skill because when students leave, when they go out into the workforce or when they're living their lives, this will become a critical skill for students. So instead of the instructor providing all the content, the instructor guides the student as to where to find content and how to analyze it, evaluate it, and apply it. So it would be open content within a learning design, a set of objectives and so on. Students would generate multimedia content to show what they've learned through online project work, and assessment would be by e-portfolios. And this is an actual example from University of British Columbia, a graduate program where students come in the first week of the course. It's about how to build a learning technology company, actually. It's how to go about the process of designing a learning technology company. And in the first week, the students go out and search a whole range of tools that are out on the internet. They're given a business plan, they're given a structure for doing this. They have to work through that structure. And at the end of the course, they do a 2-minute elevator pitch, promoting the company, and they're partly assessed on that 2-minute elevator pitch that they make. And this is just one example. We need lots of new designs, but we have a potential here for really changing education and making it more focused and relevant to the skills that students will need in the 21st century. So I have two views of the future. One is pessimistic, that we'll go back mainly to in-person lectures following COVID-19, and fully online becomes mainly Zoom lectures, forcing out the previous and effective asynchronous online learning. Or an optimistic view is that students will have choices. They will be able to choose how they learn. They can learn fully in person, they'll be able to learn in a blended mode, or they'll be able to learn fully online. And we'll use effective learning design to combine the strengths of both in-person and online synchronous and asynchronous learning. So I don't see one of these modes of delivery dominating, but I see increasingly a blending and a mixing of these, trying to work on the affordances of what each does best. And I talk a lot more about this in my free online open textbook called Teaching in a Digital Age. There's the link there. It's been downloaded nearly 1 million times now and translated into 10 languages. Thank you very much. Now, there are some comments and questions here. And so I'm going to, Aras, I don't know if you can help me with this, but...
Dr. Tanabates, your camera is off now. If not intentional, you can turn it on. We also shared the link for the book, and I can share it again. You need to turn your camera on if you want. Yes. I'm sharing the link for the book. We have a few minutes more and there are two more questions. Do you want me to read them?
Yep, definitely.
Okay. The first one is from Richard McHugh. What are your thoughts on using open platforms for organizing a class like a WordPress blog or GitHub website rather than a closed learning management system?
I think it's a very good idea if you know how to do that. I think it's quite possible to build what I would call a student-led course or program. It needs flexible management by the instructor. They have to be pretty flexible and have some idea, some kind of framework in which and clear learning objectives that they're hoping to get out of this. But I think that the use of this kind of open platforms can be extremely valuable, so long as you don't have to spend a lot of time teaching the students how to use the platforms. In many cases, they're probably better, more knowledgeable about how to use the platforms than you might be as an instructor. But nevertheless, there may be some students that may need special help in doing that. So again, I think you have to be rather careful about the privacy and security issues. That's the only thing I would caution about. But I don't see why it couldn't work very well. In fact, I know some people have done it, have used this kind of teaching very effectively.
We used the time allocated for that session, and perhaps during your presentation, I thought that we generally attribute to the openness and the internet, the networks probably increased the capacity for the openness, and this is another gain, and we really realized the value of openness during the pandemic.
Yeah, there's a question in the Q&A I'm looking for, actually. Can you see it, Aras? There it is. I got it. Okay. Some pupils who do not want the classroom interaction. These people were well served pre-pandemic by online classes that did not require presence in real time. These students are now left out. I think that's a very good point. What came out from the research on COVID-19 is that some students took to online learning like a duck to water, and others absolutely hated it. My own granddaughter really loved it. She was in her last year at high school. She had a close group of friends that she was friendly with, that she could keep in contact with online, and she loved studying online. She could get up whenever she wanted to, go to bed whenever she wanted to, and get her stuff done, and so on. And there were a number of students. One of the sad things in the US was that a number of Black students really liked the online learning because they didn't get bullied at school. So I think there are always groups of students who will definitely benefit more than others from online learning, and vice versa with face-to-face teaching. We know that some autistic children took to online learning quite well again as well. So yes, I think there's a wide range of students who actually prefer online learning, but also there are equally students who really hate it as well.
There is just one final question or comment from Dr. John Drone. He says, brilliant as ever, Tony. All this is true as long as the traditional system of education with institutions as providers and controllers of learning, with the threat prompts of credentials to keep students in check. Is it possible that this traditional system might change or be successfully changed by other approaches? For instance, where institutions are providers and students pick and choose what, when, where, etc. they learn? If so, what might make it break?
Thank you, John. That's a great point. I think the answer is definitely. There are definitely other providers coming along now that could be a threat to the traditional post-secondary institutions. And some of it could be good and some of it could be bad. I am worried about the increased commercialization of the potential for increased commercialization of post-secondary education by the big internet companies. We already have Google offering certificates, for instance, and LinkedIn Learning from Microsoft offering credentials that are outside the traditional education system. And I think that while the traditional education system doesn't respond to that, it's probably a good thing. But I think there are also, as the earlier comment was made, that there are opportunities for what I will call cooperative efforts to provide alternative education, where students can have a kind of a library access, only it's to a wide range of courses. We've already got that kind of thing happening with, for instance, MOOCs and Coursera and so on. So I think it is likely that we will have an increasing range of different providers. My worry is that it will become commercialized, and then some of the benefits of a public education system, such as particularly independence and the academic freedom issues and so on, that will all be lost. And there are a lot of good things about the public education system that I don't want to see go. So it's a question of whether it's a threat or a promise. And I think it's more of a threat at the moment than it is of a promise. We saw, for instance, how edX has now become, which was meant to be an open access platform, has now become commercialized through the purchase by 2U. So it doesn't look good in terms of the power and the strength of the internet companies. And in particular, if they get into artificial intelligence, I think that could be a real threat to the post-secondary system, public systems.
Thank you, Dr. Tony Bates. I think this was the last question. Ewan, can you stop recording, please?